In this video, we're going to look at the law anything to the power of 0 is equal to 1. Now what we'll do is we'll kind of show you some examples of that and show you why that works for every case. So I'll just write out some lists here. Now for the most part we can fill these in. We should know what 3 cubed, 3 squared and 3 to the power of 1 is, and then 3 to the power of 0 we'll look at in a second. So we'll just fill in the values for the ones we know. 3 cubed is 27, 3 squared is 9, 3 to the 1 is just 3, 5 cubed is 125, 5 squared is 25, and 5 to the 1 is just 5. Now, what we've got here again is we've got a pattern, okay? So every time I go down a line, what I'm doing is I'm dividing by the base number. So 27 divided by 3 is 9, divided by 3 is 3, divided by 3. Now what I'm doing here is 3 divided by 3, and remember anything divided by itself will always be equal to 1. So here we have an example, 3 to the power of 0 equals 1, which meets up with this law here, x to the power of 0 equals 1. So basically anything to the power of 0 is equal to 1. Again, look at the 5 cubed, 125, 5 squared, 5 to the power of 1. Now each time here, going down each line, I'm dividing by 5. 125 divided by 5 is 25, 25 divided by 5 is 5, and then 5 divided by 5, if I continue this pattern, 5 divided by 5, well, anything divided by itself will be 1. 5 goes into 5 once. And then what we've got here again is another example of something to the power of 0 equals 1. Now, we can do that with this kind of general case. So I've got x cubed. Now, it seems a bit daft to write this out, but basically what I've got is x cubed is equal to x cubed, x squared is equal to x squared, x to the 1 is equal to x to the 1. What I'm still doing here, though, is I'm still, each time I go down a line, I'm dividing by the base. The base is x. So x cubed divided by x would leave me with x squared. X squared divided by x would leave me with just x. And x divided by x, well, if you listen to what I'm saying there, x divided by x, that's something being divided by itself. So x divided by x will be 1. Remember, anything divided by itself is 1. So there's 3 examples of it working in this general case here. This is the rule we're going to use. What we'll now do is we'll try and look at where this might appear in an exam style question. So if we have this law here and we want to simplify these, we've got here x squared divided by x squared. Now there's a couple of ways to look at this question. You can think, well, x squared divided by x squared, that's basically something divided by itself, so we know the answer is going to be 1. But just so we can kind of put it into the form of this law here, we could use our division law. So remember, when we're dividing indices, we subtract the index number. So 2 take away 2 would give me x to the power of 0. And when I see that x to the power of 0, I've just got to remember that that can be simplified further, and I can make that 1. Now, as I said, that's a bit of a funny case, because you might just look at this and say, well, that divided by itself is just 1. Now, next question, a little bit less obvious. So we've got here 5x squared times 7x to the negative 2. So we're multiplying these indices together, and remember that means that I'm going to add together these index numbers. So let's start with the 5 times the 7. 5 7s are 35. And then the base is x for the index part, or the indices part, so x is the base. And then because I'm multiplying, remember when I multiply indices together, I add together these two numbers. So 2 plus negative 2 is 0. So that's going to become x to the power of 0. Now, we need to be a little bit careful here, because a lot of people might think, well, that's something to the power of 0, and therefore this whole thing is just going to become 1. But actually, the only part that's to the power of 0 there is this part here. That little power of 0 is only actually affecting the x. It's got absolutely nothing to do with this 35 here. So that x to the power of 0, in other words, the bit I've highlighted in pink here, that will become 1, but then it's still being multiplied by 35. So really, and I wouldn't necessarily write both these lines here, that's now 35 times 1, which is just 35. Okay, I'd probably just go straight from this line to this line. So just be careful. Just because you see a power of 0 doesn't mean the next line is necessarily going to be 1. You've got to think about what is the power of 0 actually acting on. That brings us to example C here. Now, this one has 4 times x to the power of 0, but it's a slight difference. So there are brackets around this 4x, which means all of this is to the power of 0. So that 0 there is actually acting on the whole bracket. Okay, so everything in there. So because everything in there is to the power of 0, the answer to this is 1. Now, we could have a look just up here at another example. So something very similar, if it said 4x to 0 without brackets, then in this case, that x is the only thing that's to the power of 0. So this one would become 4 times 1, which would be 4. Now you can just have a minute and just think about the difference between these two examples. That's important that you understand how to deal with each of these. We'll now look at the last example. Now what we're doing here is we're going to multiply out the bracket. So we'll start off by x to the half times x to the half. Now remember, because we're multiplying out the bracket and we multiply indices, we add the index number. So a half plus a half is 1. So that's going to become x to the power of 1. Now we don't necessarily write the 1, we can put it in if we want, but that doesn't need to be there, so we can just remove that again. And then if we look at the next part and do the next multiplication, that's x to the half times x to the half times x to the negative a half. So remember, because I'm multiplying out the bracket, because I'm multiplying indices here, I have to add this index and this index together. Now a half plus negative a half is 0, so that becomes plus x to the 0. Now this one is fully simplified. Again, we don't need to write that little one at the top, we can just leave it as x. But this one here, x to the power of 0, well, that's using this law here, so that is actually going to become a 1. So we need one more line of working here, which is x plus 1. I'm now going to give you a shot to try 5 of these questions yourself. So what to do is pause the video, and then when you're ready to go over any of them, just press play and you can go over the answer and check it. Okay, we'll go through the first one just now. So what we've got here, x to the power of 0, that is just going to be 1. For part B, again, we have just y, again, to the power of 0. So it doesn't matter what's to the power of 0. Anything to the power of 0 just becomes 1. So again, nice and simple here. The answer is just 1. For example C, we need to be a little bit more careful because I've got 2 times y to the 0. So I need to think about what is this 0 actually acting on. And again, it's important to note here that only the y has the power of 0. So that's 2 times y to the power of 0. Okay, so we're going to have the y to the power of 0 is going to become a 1, but it's still got to be multiplied by this 2. So that should become 2 times 1, which is 2. Now you can go straight from this line to this line if you like. You don't need to put this middle line in, but I'm just trying to illustrate what's happening. For example D, again we have 3y all to the power of 0. So again we've got to think about what is this 0 actually acting on. Now the power here is the power on the bracket, so it includes everything inside the bracket. So the bracket to the power of 0 here means everything in here is to the power of 0, and therefore that whole thing is just going to become 1. Lastly, this example down here, multiplying out the bracket, and we'll start to go through that step by step. So the first multiplication here, we'll put the line in for, that's multiplication, so we're going to add these 2 index numbers together. So 1x there and 4x there, so 1 times 4 is 4, and then x cubed times x squared, because I'm adding the indices together, or the index numbers together, that's x to the power of 5. We then go on to multiply the second part, so it's x cubed times 2x to the negative 3. So again, I've got a 1 hidden in front of this, times the 2, that's going to be positive 2. And then I'm going to add the index numbers when I multiply the x cubed and the x to the negative 3. So 3 plus negative 3 is 0, so that's x to the 0. So hopefully you've got the right kind of idea with finishing this off. So we've got 4x to the 5, that's remaining unchanged. And in this one here, we've got that power of 0. And again, we need to think about what is the 0 actually acting on here. And that 0 is just acting on the x. In other words, that 2 is not included. If it was the 2 here was going to be included, it would have brackets around the 2 and the x. So the x to the 0 becomes 1. So we end up with 2 times 1, which is just going to be 2.